Do you find yourself feeling guilty about certain desires? Maybe you struggle to see your partner as both this wife, mother material, and that woman that you want to devour. Or perhaps you've noticed that the forbidden aspects of sex are what really turn you on, and you don't know why. We are about to get into all of this. Welcome back to The Naked Connection. This is the show that supports driven men to reach sexual mastery and build deep connections. What's up, you guys? It's Kirsten, and today we are diving into how religious upbringing can shape your sex life. In this episode, you will discover why your sexual desires might actually be connected to religious restrictions, how the Madonna-Whore Complex could really be sabotaging your relationships, and why breaking free from these patterns doesn't mean that you have to abandon your faith, beliefs, or religion. To have this conversation, I have invited on Lauren Rogers onto the show. She is a certified holistic sex educator, and she really specializes in helping people heal from religious sexual shame. Also, she works with couples to create pathways to sexual wholeness that honor both spirituality and pleasure. Take a moment, be sure to hit subscribe so that you do not miss a single episode. And you guys, let's get some. Lauren, Elise, Rogers, welcome to The Naked Connection.
So thankful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Many men have really grown up receiving some pretty powerful messages about sex and relationships through spiritual or religious upbringing. And what, from the incredible work that you do, has been really the most significant way you've seen some of these teachings shape men's relationships with their sexuality?
Mm. In what ways have I not seen these beliefs shape their sexuality? The World Health Organization says that most of us received incomplete and inaccurate sexuality education. And I think I want any listener today to just inhale and exhale on that one, that most of us are out here just stumbling through things. Then, if you take the societal context that many of the folks that I work with who are purity culture survivors, I say that in quotes because it's just a phrase that's become popular, and it means anyone who grew up inside of a religious context, whether it was high control religion or they just went to church occasionally on a Sunday. What we see added into this incomplete and inaccurate education is a set of societal sexual values, things that we were taught to believe about the sex that we wanted or desirous of having. And there was a certain morality attached to certain behaviors. And we began to develop an entire slew of what I call sexual beliefs that were planted in our sexual gardens before we could even consent to that being the case, right? These were lessons that went far back, even into stories like Adam and Eve, right? They were all blissful in the garden. Then Eve, the temptress, came in and destroyed Adam's life. I mean, it goes back to then that women can be temptresses. So we must guard ourselves against the stumbling block that is the naked female form so that we can experience some type of spiritual righteousness.
Mm.
And so what I see is this started way back with Plato, ironically, this idea of dualism, that we have the mind and we have the body, and they're at war with one another. And with the male-bodied clients that I work with, we do a lot of sorting through a lot of different narratives that I'd love to talk about today because your audience might hear themselves in some of them, like the Madonna-Whore Complex, like this idea of reaction formation, that we formed our sexuality inside of a world where it wasn't even appropriate to talk about sexuality. So there's probably a lot of gaps that we need filling in. But I just love to normalize, first and foremost, the experience that men may have had inside of some religious context in which they grew up not only with incomplete and inaccurate sexuality education, but also a morality ascribed to their sexual behaviors, because it has long-lasting ramifications that can be undone but deserve to be addressed.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. I just, even when you said that part about being at odds with your mind and your body. Even thinking in some of the men I've worked with, like how true that can be for anybody. And it's like, what do you do when that's happening? And yeah, you mentioned even a couple of these different belief systems that can be formed. I'm curious of what, just in the work that you do, what do you see as some of the top beliefs or top patterns that men are finding themselves in if they grew up
Yeah.
in this type of an environment?
Yeah, I think we could start with some basic ones. So, an exercise I do with my clients, and your listeners could literally do this right now, is to think of a certain memory from adolescence, because 7, 14, and 21 are where a lot of our sexual beliefs were planted in our sexual gardens. So, pick some memory from 14. Just think on it for just a second. Now, I want to give you some fill in the blank questions, and I want you to think of how your 14-year-old self would have responded to these questions.
Okay.
Okay, you can do it too, because everybody has them, but it's really interesting for men. Sex is fill in the blank. My body belongs to fill in the blank. My role in sex is it is a man's job to fill in the blank. It is a woman's job to fill in the blank. Masturbation is fill in the blank. Right? Sex is between fill in the blank. What's really interesting about some of these beliefs that were planted in our sexual gardens is that some of these, if we were to take my garden analogy and go even deeper, are explicit sex negative beliefs, meaning that they're kind of like a weed that you've plucked long ago, you've seen it, you've noted it, it no longer affects you. It's still really helpful to note it because growth mindset, we can tap ourselves on the back and be like, good job, look at you growing. It's really helpful to do this sometimes because it can be hard when working through sexuality. So good job if you're now thinking back on some of those beliefs that you have stated and you no longer believe them, they no longer affect your lives. Okay, so that's a little weed at the top of the garden. Now, the next level of sex negative belief is a latent sex negative belief. And I like to say that it's like a dandelion that you go to pull out of your yard and you get the top of the dandelion, but those roots are in there. And they're really frustrating. And they do get in the way of your sexual functioning. Perhaps you're dating and they get in the way of the casual sex that you want to have. Or you're in a long-term partnership and you are frustrated. You're like, I know I don't believe this anymore, that a woman's role is to be in the home and a man's role is to provide. But boy, oh boy, do I find myself resentful that she's not at home with a meal and her legs spread open for us to have this sexual relationship. Gosh, that's a latent sex negative belief. You know that you no longer identify with it, but it frustrates you. Then, the deepest level of sex negative belief that I find with my male clients and my female clients is this body-based sex negative belief. And the Reverend Beverly Dale, who works with a lot of purity culture survivors, equates this to soil blight, to sick soil. I tell my clients that when they've stumbled into a body-based sex negative belief, they literally feel a bodily response, like a gag reflex kicks in, or they feel themselves cringe and look away. Or when I'm doing this exercise with clients in person or on Zoom, I watch their eyes disassociate. I watch them not even want to address that this exists in their bodies. What I tell my clients is that the latent ones, you just need to till up the soil a little bit. You need to listen to podcasts like this one. You need to read some books. You are able to really work on those. The body-based sex negative beliefs deserve, let me say it again, deserve attention. They deserve everything that a good farmer would know to do with his soil, to rest the soil, to spread the manure all over it and let it soak in, to give it some sunlight, to give it wind and air and space to breathe. Body-based sex negative beliefs are stored in all of our bodies. All of them, all of us have them. But those of my clients who've come out of religious spaces tend to have one specifically attached to who they believe sex is for, how they believe sex should be, what they believe their roles are, who they believe their bodies belong to and their wives' bodies belong to, what they think about pornography, what they think about masturbation, whose obligation it is to provide them with their orgasm, These types of body-based beliefs can sit in our bodies, and it is okay to give them the time and the attention that they deserve. And yeah, they run deep.
All the way to the core, yeah. I appreciate sharing that analogy because it feels so true, and I imagine as you were describing this, I was thinking when I was younger, we had this giant bougainvillea bush that lived in our side yard, and my dad wanted to get rid of it because it was, like, actually starting to mess up the foundation of the driveway, and so it was, like, this huge arduous process of pulling this plant that has really deep roots from the ground and how it really shook the whole foundation of her driveway. And just thinking about that analogy in this example of how by pulling up some of these weeds or these beliefs or these old patterning about intimacy, about sex, how that can at first be really regulating or disruptive to the rest of your life.
Yes, it's so interesting you say this because literally just minutes before this, I was with a client and we were talking about that when we stop an old pattern, that is going to create disruption. That is going to. And so it's really important to be able to sit with in what ways have I been experiencing the negative impacts of old patterns that I'm ready to be done with. Okay, maybe my relationship is just literally feeling like it's on autopilot and we have no sexual intimacy. Or maybe it's I've been trying to have these casual dating encounters, they're going nowhere. Okay, that is an impact that you keep feeling through the repetitious behaviors that you are engaging in. That's dysregulating. We don't like it. Nobody likes it. And when we start to root these beliefs in our bodies, we're also faced with impacts. And it's really beautiful to sit with, okay, which one of these, huh, I mean, we've all been there at a growth point in our lives, whether it was we chose to change our eating habits. And you found that, oh my goodness, I also have to change some of my friendships. I have to change how I go about my daily routine. You see the different ways in which your life has to shift. Those are not negative, but they are felt experiences. The same things happen when we begin to uproot sexual beliefs that have had their roots all wound about our foundations. I love that adage. I'm gonna take that one. It's so beautiful.
Take it. Yeah, I just want to ask this before we get any deeper, because I would imagine that, let's say someone is listening in and maybe they grew up deeply connected to a religion and they recognize, okay, I picked up some narratives or some beliefs that are really impacting me, and I want to step into a space to be able to explore sexuality more. And at the same time, I still want to honor my religion and honor my belief system. And like, how do we do both? Or can we
Mm.
do both? Just because I want to do that before we dive any
Yes.
further in case people
Yes.
are like, I don't want to listen because I'm feeling resistance that I'd be pushed away from this thing that is still important to me.
Yes. So you are speaking to my favorite thing. I deeply believe that not only can we make values aligned sexual decisions and be a person of faith, I believe we have an even higher ethical responsibility. I believe that there are many things that have been carried down with different faith structures throughout the centuries that are not actually a part of the theology of the actual faith that you ascribe to. I would call these instead like these embedded theology pieces. I call them like the sidecar, like, you know, those like little motorcycles and they have a little sidecar. It's not actually the tenets of your religion. And so I believe that my clients of faith, and I have many of them, deserve to get to sift through what I call an discernment versus obedience approach. Instead of this blindly obeying what some pastor or the pastor's pastor or someone is just telling you, to sit with your scriptures and discern for yourself, for your family, what truly does align with your faith structure and your values system. I believe you have a right and a responsibility to do so. No, I don't think that we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater type of thing. I think that folks can, I like to say, love Jesus and love sex. Like these are not separate things. And if Christianity is not your faith of origin, I believe the same for every religion, that we should be honoring the bodies of others and our own. We should be honoring the sex that we have. And we can do that in many different ways that align with your faith practices.
Mm.
So thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for sharing that. This is so I studied sex really from a tantric lens, and one of kind of the components in tantric theology is looking at this element that like reproduction and sex is what has created most of what we experience in life, whether it's like trees or animals or bugs or humans, and that it is such a beautiful part of it. Like to step away and demonize sex would be to like demonize all of creation. And that's just like one theoretical lens to view this through. And but I just really resonated with, oh, how interesting that this act and this like part of life that creates everything is kind of comes with these other elements that make it dark or bad or wrong or shameful or whatever have you. It's just an interesting thought that comes up for me when I think about this.
Yeah. And I like to speak of the erotic mind often with my
Mm,
clients, that there is such an ethical responsibility that we have to differentiate between fantasy and reality.
mm,
And
mm,
what's interesting is many of us grew up reading Grimm's fairy tales. Many of us grew up watching Disney movies. We know a good story. I
mm.
really do. And I like to challenge my clients and ask if after they watched Peter Pan, did they climb up on their coffee table and try to fly? Some of them did, some of them didn't. Because from a very young age, we were educated on the differentiation between fairy tale and
Mm,
reality. We
mhm,
were never discouraged from reading fairy tales. In fact, we know the benefits
mm,
of self soothing in a fantasy world, of escaping into the lives of a character. But yet, what I feel has been demonized inside of so many religious spaces is the erotic realm.
mm,
We have become so afraid of it that we have cast it out, that we have felt as if it is this monster that's going to destroy us because we have not been tooled up. We haven't
mm,
been equipped to sit with it
mm,
and explore the fantasy realm and understand the differentiation between what would harm someone in the realistic realm. We'd be amiss if we didn't call out the hundreds of thousands of cases of sexual abuse inside of religious spaces.
yeah.
This happens every day. We're not even shocked anymore. And I would argue it is because of, again, this reaction formation thing. This is a thing Freud studied forever long ago, and Freud is very problematic in sexual spaces. And yet, I do love to bring this to my clients' attention that what we did inside of these religious spaces is we said, good boy, good job. And we taught men to be pure and to be chaste.
Mhm,
And so what happened was, as they grew in maturity, we also said, your sexual behaviors, those are wrong. They cannot be discussed in these spaces and these moral spaces. And so these young pubescent boys were developing sexually and being told these are wrong. These are wrong. There's been entire studies done on the confessional inside of the Catholic religion, and that there was a time in which there was as great a punishment for non consensual taking of sex, SA, and masturbation. So we had this wide spectrum of punishment for all sexual sins.
mm,
And we had this full expectation that it would just be forgiven. Oh,
mm,
it'll just be forgiven. So there's no accountability. It's labeled very wrong and sinful. But there's no space to discuss our sexual desires, to discuss how we can have a healthy erotic life and not harm another person. And what are the steps of accountability to take so that we can right ourselves? What are the tools that we need so that we don't do that? It's just been perpetuating over and over spaces. You name the space, we see sexual harm being done. And ironically, the harm that is being done is to people in female bodies. We're
mm,
just letting these harmful men rise to the top, which then goes on to hurt the good men, who I am certain is your audience. And so, to your audience, I say you owe it to yourself to do this work, to get
mm,
super comfy wumpy with your erotic spaces so that you can be a part of the good ones,
mm.
so that you can nurture the erotic in your homes and in your sexual relationships in a way that aligns with your values.
Yeah. Yeah, and to that point, what is say someone's tuning in and they're like, this is my background, I'm really connecting with this, I'm recognizing that that this has really impacted my ability to explore my erotic life. What is where do I go from here? What do I do?
One of my favorite questions. Okay, so Dr. Jack Moran wrote this incredible book, The Erotic Mind, where he studied thousands and thousands of people and their erotic behaviors. And he found that all of us kind of fall into these 4 cornerstones of eroticism. So I'll share them with your listeners. And then I'll tell you the one that most of my clients who've come out of some form of high control religion or lack of sexuality education fall into. Okay, they are longing and anticipation. Okay, so that's those of us who are erotically stimulated by the thing that's just out of reach.
Yes.
Number 2 is violating prohibitions. And that is those of us who are turned on by a little bit of the naughtiness factor, a little bit of that which is taboo. Number 3 is search for power. Those of us who are turned on by power over consensually or power under, right? Surrendering, just take me now type of turn-ons. Okay. Number 4 is overcoming ambivalence. This one's tricky, but I like to equate it to when you're in middle school and you just want that person in the hallway to notice you and they're totally playing cool. Like they're totally not into you. You just want them to notice you, but they are ambivalent towards you. We all know this feeling, right? It's like you're playing hard to get, you're playing it so cool. Oh, I don't want them to know type of thing. Okay. Every gender does this. This is not just a thing that we've experienced in one body. All right. So those are the 4: longing, anticipation, violating prohibitions, search for power, and overcoming ambivalence. Sometimes you have a combo of the 4. But sometimes you're like, oh my goodness, that's my one. Did you have one that like jumped out at you?
This is so funny. As you were saying this, I was like, wait, all of these.
It's totally good. And those who've done real work to be able to drop into their sexuality, yes, tend to say this because they're like,
Okay.
oh, I like all of these. And
I
I
was like,
have
I
all
want
of
all
these.
of them.
You can't have all of them. You get them all, Kirsten. And for those who are listening who might never have played with these things, we find that those who grew up in high control religion are most turned on by the violating prohibitions. I'll tell you how many of my clients had their first kiss behind the baptismal and first kiss in the church basement, first kiss in the church parking lot, first kiss, first hand job, first blow job, you name it. They all had this combination, right, of the light and the dark, of the paradox, of the good and the bad, of the pure and the evil. And when we can understand Jack's erotic equation, which is attraction plus obstacle equals excitement, we can begin to inject excitement wherever we want it. Now, here's the tricky paradox again. All of those 4 cornerstones, amazing in the erotic realm. They are also all recipes for unhealthy romantic relationships. All right. To have the lover who is just out of reach and we can never experience true intimacy and connection with is going to be harmful all the time. To have the lover who we are constantly cheating on in order to have our erotic senses fulfilled, not going to be a healthy relationship. Same thing with taking power over our partner or asking them to be submissive to us. It's going to have unhealthy dynamics. And the same thing with ambivalence. Funny story for our audience. I was married for a decade before my whole life fell to pieces and was rebuilt. And I was married for a decade to a gay man. And I do not think this is accidental. Now, looking back at my purity culture upbringing, I was conditioned to believe that men only want one thing. And so I was conditioned to look for the men who are more respectful, for the men who honored my boundaries, for the men who didn't want me. Okay. So I
Here we
love
go.
to say that my first crush, my first kiss, and my first husband are all now happily gay. Now, they're wonderful friends and were awfully ambivalent towards me. I had to work really hard to win my ex-husband's affection, and he didn't know he was gay either. He grew up in purity culture, and so that's like literally pushed the whole thing down. But just a pure example of how it will destroy relationship. What we can do, though, is once we feel brave enough, whether it is with a professional or through reading Jack's book, The Erotic Mind, or through listening to podcasts like these, we can get curious on it. We can look back at our peak sexual encounters. We can look at our sexual fantasies that are most likely to turn us on. And we can go, oh my goodness, it's that one cornerstone. Great. Then inside of healthy relationship, we can inject little bits of our favorite cornerstone, whether it's talking about fantasy or with my now very healthy, loving, consistent partner. If I am turned on and I kind of come on to him, all he has to do to get my engine revving is to go, oh, baby, and look at his watch. I don't really think I have time for this today. It's all it takes.
You're like, what?
What? I will overcome. I will have you now. I will take you now. And what's so delightful about that is that in our relational dynamic, there is zero ambivalence. He is there for me. He is consistent. He is loving. I do not have to work to earn my worth or his love. But if we want to heighten the erotic experience inside of my healthy marriage, which, my friends, can be boring, because when we've been conditioned to have our sexuality be informed by some obstacle that doesn't feel like homeostasis. Homeostasis is very boring and flat and healthy and wonderful and good for the nervous system, but bad for the erotic. And so it's okay to be able, in a tantric sense or in an energetic sense or in an imaginatory sense, to be able to play with these things.
Oh my goodness. Okay, this is incredible. I want to read this book now.
It's so good. It's so good. It's on Audible too, if folks are better at listening to books and on a commute or something like that. It is so good. It is my go-to manual.
Amazing, amazing. We'll have to check in with ourselves to see which of these resonates most. And okay, you said something, I'm like totally pivoting here, but you shared something a little bit ago. You mentioned like the Madonna-Whore Complex. And I am so curious to understand if you could explain it for people that might not know what that is, and just like really I want to dive into that a little bit with you.
Oh, let's go. It's one of the biggest sexual obstacles for folks raised inside of religious spaces. It goes like this, that men are conditioned to desire the whore and marry the Madonna. Okay? When you have been taught your whole life that women are temptresses and to stay away from the temptress and to look for a pure, chaste woman to be the mother of your children, it is highly confusing for all people's sexuality, not only men, but also women. I work with countless men who have come up in their youth and adolescence and young adulthood with this belief. Okay. So yes, they're having like these hot one-night stands with these whores, women in female bodies. And then they are getting themselves into a relationship with a woman they, in quotes, respect. So then they're in these relationships and they cannot get inside of a sexual space with this woman. They deal with some forms of erectile dysfunction. They deal with premature ejaculation. They deal with wanting to be out of the relationship. They deal with picking a fight in order to create some type of emotional landscape that creates an obstacle so that they can have hot sex. Friends, this is you. You are not alone. This is the Madonna-Whore Complex at work. Women actually are neither. What horrible examples of sexuality to give to women. Either you are judged and called a whore for your sexual behaviors, or you are told to be pure and virginal and not be a sexual being at all. Both of these don't allow women to win. And they don't allow men to see a woman as a full erotic creature who is able to both nurture her children and have a lot of fun in the bedroom. And so when we begin to think of, again, these old beliefs that have nothing to do with our faith systems, they are definitely pieces of embedded theology. They actually go back to the church fathers. So at the Council of Nicaea, this group of men got together and decided what was going to go into the Christian scriptures. And if we look at these men, Tertullian or Aristotle, like it's all of these people that we know their names, we can find things like Tertullian said that the woman was the gateway to the devil. And when we begin to understand the origins of, again, the embedded theology that came down with these spiritual teachings, and that these men hated women, like truly hated them, And they wanted us to worship the mind and defy the body and all of this type of stuff. We can understand that this isn't actually a faith principle. This was a misogynistic, outdated patriarchal principle that doesn't help anybody anymore. This was said in a time where women were property. And women aren't property anymore. And it actually benefits men in this culture to have a sexy, egalitarian partner. This is good for all of us. It creates much better sex when you know that this woman wants to be there with you and gets to be there in all of her sexuality. And it definitely behooves every single man to understand that they don't have to go looking for sex that is hot and spicy and erotic outside of their relationships. That women crave adventure and risk, that women crave sexy contexts inside of healthy partnership. They want both, and you can have both too.
Yeah. Yeah, when you said the piece about that women aren't winning in this dynamic, and it feels like men aren't really winning either. And I know there's been a lot of studies done that kind of really show that women are often craving more adventurous sex. And it's just really interesting that can get covered up or clouded or be viewed a very specific way. And yeah, I had a friend years ago who was in a dynamic where basically her partner really spoke in a sense that was putting her on this pure pedestal of you're the type of woman that like I marry, and didn't had beautiful sex, but then didn't want to go into these like more erotic or kinky places with her, because she shared was that he was basically like, I couldn't imagine doing that to you because you're this pure, beautiful woman that could be the mother of my children. And I couldn't imagine like dominating you or going into this space or trying this thing out with you. They couldn't collide both worlds. And I just remember thinking, well, like that, what a missed opportunity to have everything.
You too can have it all. No, I call it, and I mean this in love. So I want the audience to hear me. I mean this so in love that I often get couples who come to me and, right, we're pointing at the woman. She doesn't want sex. And I go, I bet you it's not that she doesn't want sex. It's that she doesn't want that sex. He goes, what do you mean? And I'm like, okay, let me simplify it for you. Okay. So I call this my caveman theory. It is my opinion. And I do not mean this offensively. I think this is beautiful that men seek and yearn for this partner, this good one. And they're like, oh, I found my woman. And I am going to put woman in cave and I'm going to fuck woman same way every day. I'm going to go to work, come home, fuck woman. Oh my God, this is my dream. Okay. Love it. I love it. It's beautiful. It is so beautiful. Women are bored out of their minds. They are bored out of their minds. They want out of the cave. They want to go on an adventure. They want you to take them somewhere. Esther Perel says that sex isn't something we do. Sex is someplace we go. That we have this entire erotic landscape. Yes, like your friend was like, wait, what? No, I'd love to do those things, right? Tie me up, right? Tie me up, right? And then let's cook dinner together and have a family discussion. Right. It's so interesting how Jack Moran covers this in The Erotic Mind. The idea that we, as adult human beings, are sex educators because there are most likely children in our lives somewhere. And when children grow up not thinking that healthy sex can exist inside of healthy partnership, we do damage to children. And so we owe it to ourselves and to our kids to be able to go to these erotic realms, to be able to tie up our partners, blindfold them, have sex in the basement, have sex on the washer and dryer, bring sex toys on the road trip, right? Have this fun because it benefits everyone. It makes me smile that the World Health Organization says that sexual health is fundamental to the well-being of individuals, families, and communities. And as I see individuals come to an understanding of their own sexual wholeness, have an understanding and a grasp upon their own sexual values and how to protect and respect theirs and the values of others, what I see then is that they benefit, then their families benefit, and then their communities benefit. I'm working with several couples right now, and they're getting to this point in the work where all of their friends are like turning and looking at them and going, what's going on, you two? What's up? What, you two just keep smiling and kissing, and you're like, something different has happened here. I have goosebumps because, friends, that's what heals the world. That provides this sense of security for all of those around us. when we're having good sex. This is what? Why are we not all doing this? What? Having better sex heals the world? Yes. Yes.
I absolutely love this because in so many ways this is why I wanted to go into this work, and having this show is really when I recognized that our sex life truly has the power to influence the well-being of the rest of our life, and I really firmly believe that. And yeah, when I always like giggle to myself because I do believe that if just imagining that for a moment, like every person at your office, if you work in a company, like woke up and had the best sex of their life, like how do you think they would show up to work? If we like everyone that's working at like your local grocery store or doctor's office, whatever have you, if they had the best sex of their life, how do you think that you guys would engage with one? When I think about it from that lens, I'm like, it really truly does have the capacity to change the world. So
Amen.
we're on
Amen
the
and
same
amen.
page.
Yes, I don't people will tell me all the time, I don't understand. Like, you wanna be a sexuality educator and intimacy coach.
Mm,
Like, you have a business? I'm like, not only do I have a business, I'm thriving. I am so busy. And I don't think that it is we have been conditioned to think that this is some selfish thing to work on, to address, and it is not. It is the absolute opposite.
mm,
It benefits our children, our families, our communities. It was interesting earlier you were talking about putting your friend felt like they were put on some pedestal, right? Some like purity pedestal. And another thing I studied at length is this thing called the pedestal paradigm. And that's that as we grow in goodness, okay, as our reputation in the workplace increases and people are like, wow, he's just a good man. We feel that we cannot be our most human and guttural too. That we cannot equate a person who has sexual desires with that idea of goodness. That all goes back to these purity culture teachings. This all goes back to this weird idea that we can't be both
mm,
sexual and valued, that we
mm,
can't be ethical and slutty, that we would somehow be consumed by this evil beast that is sexuality. And it's just far from the truth. You're exactly right. The folks who feel truly connected with their partner, that roll over and have beautiful, healthy sex, or who roll over and say, oh, honey, I could really use an orgasm. And their partner can say, love you. I'm getting up to journal. This is me this morning. Okay. And then can say to their partner, but you enjoy a juicy fantasy and then come tell me later what you came to. Okay. The couples who can do this, where then I'm down journaling in our living room with my coffee and my journal, and my husband comes down and gives me this kiss on the forehead, and I say, what'd you come to? And he tells me some gorgeous fantasy that's wild and erotic. And I go, oh my God, that's so hot. And he goes, I love you. And then goes and gets his coffee.
mm.
That is a home in which human beings exist. Erotic human beings who desire sex at different times of the day because his testosterone is thriving and through the roof in the morning and deserves to have a delicious orgasm. And yet I am not responsible.
Mm.
I am not the submissive wife whose sole job is to give her husband sex lest he go and stray, which literally I was taught, right? That if a husband was cheating, it was my fault because I wasn't giving him enough sex.
Mm.
No, his sex, his orgasms, his responsibility, and this can thrive inside of partnership. Doesn't always look like these partnered sexual encounters where there's, even though we've both been saying we'd love to be tied up, do all these things. Yes, it doesn't always look like that. It sometimes can look like that. And it is so good for us all.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's so interesting is that just from what I understand about attraction is that so often when an individual carries kind of two polarities within their personality or within who they are, that is really attractive. And even stepping outside of sex and just thinking a man that is able to like really like dive into his work and have this really deep dedication and perseverance and then can turn around and be really playful. Like that's really attractive to a woman.
Mhm.
Or like on the flip side, like a woman that can be really smart and well spoken and then can turn around and be this little girl and be playful and
Mhm.
silly and all of
Mhm.
the things. Like that's really often like those polarities are often really attractive. And so being able to also incorporate, it sounds like being a good man and being wild in the bedroom and taking control, whatever have you, like, that is really attractive, and the same for women. So it's just interesting how this innate attraction can really counteract some of the belief systems that we've formed around how to engage as a person in this world.
Yeah. And I think it would just take us back to try to find a character in history, a human in history. Try to think of someone who, is all good, right? There's so many different schools of thought, whether it's Jungian or all of these different things about shadow side,
Mhm.
right? And there's two sides to every coin. There's shadow, there's light. When you look at a black and white photograph, it would not have the beauty it has without shadow.
Mm.
And the more comfortable we get existing and being able to play in that space, the more we can also celebrate the light. That once we have owned this piece of our shadow and we know how to play with it, we know how to sit in the polarization, we know how to play with the polarity, we know how to celebrate this aspect of us in a safe and consensual way, the
Mhm.
less likely it is to get squeezed out sideways and to harm, the
Mm.
less likely it is to be so shocking to ourselves when we do this thing. It is necessary. There's this film that's popular now. Nicole Kidman was just in Baby Girl, this movie, and inside of it, she's in this long-term relationship. And she has never had a partnered orgasm with her husband. She loves her husband. She loves her daughters. And in the very first scene, you see her fake an orgasm with her loving partner, played by Antonio Banderas. And I love that they gave a true masculine, sexy man to this character. This is not some washed, he's attentive. He is a producer, director on Broadway at the height of his career. We are not talking about some man who's not there doing the work.
Mhm.
We get to see that Nicole's character has been faking orgasm. Then we get to see her sneak off and watch the porn that actually brings her to orgasm, which is a part of her shadow, but she feels utterly ashamed to bring this into her good marriage. She feels like that it cannot be accepted into this space, that she could not tell her husband because what would he think of her? So what ends up happening is she has an affair with a younger coworker, which we see all four cornerstones of eroticism played out. And yet, in this realm, we have every reason to believe that is unethical behavior, right? Because in this realm, is it incredibly erotic when a boss has an affair with an employee? Yes. Is it also very dangerous? Of course, because she could fire him, right? There are so many different elements at play that are non-ethical and not comfy, right? And I just long for the day when folks in healthy, loving, long-term partnerships can turn with curiosity and look at these shadow pieces, look at their cornerstones of eroticism, look at the things that were planted in their sexual gardens by their restrictive religious past, and say, you know what? The body turns pain into pleasure. And pleasure is often the greatest antidote to pain. And so, what if, instead of banishing these things to the shadows, I took my religious constraints and turned them into these incredible long-term relationships? And thankfully, you do see some of these things. It just thrills me to no end. But I long for every man to understand that these restrictions from the past could be sexual gold
Mhm.
if he could get curious around them.
Oh my goodness. So beautiful. And in thinking about as we're closing out here and just making that note, what is one thing, if this has been really connecting with a listener, that they could start doing today? Like one
Mhm.
action they could take, or even just maybe you mentioned those questions in the beginning that were so beautiful. If there's something along those lines or otherwise to really start taking action to move in a different direction if that is what they desire.
Yeah. Number one, I would want any man who is listening to this episode to turn towards yourself with curiosity and compassion. So many of the sexual beliefs that are planted in your sexual garden were put there without your consent. So, number one, curiosity and compassion, my friend.
Mm.
Number two, you now get to be the sex positive force in your life. You are now both the gardener and the flower that is growing. You get to decide what is nurtured in you. And I highly recommend asking yourself the questions that we did earlier on in this episode. Go back and listen. Pick up a copy of The Erotic Mind. At the end of the book are his entire sexual excitement survey, as well as his sexual fantasies survey. Do it.
Ooh.
Start to get comfy with your core erotic themes so that you can be the master of your erotic intelligence and communicate that with your partners. Your partners deserve to get to say whether or not they want to play in that erotic space with you as well. This is not just up to you. This is up to your partner. But I betcha your partners have an erotic space of their own. Do these quizzes at the end of the book with your partner. Have fun. And if you get stuck, know that there are individuals like me out there that you can reach out to and contact. You can go to sexedforyou.com/free consult and fill out that form if you want to get to know me more. But also, there are incredible therapists and educators and coaches, I'm sure, that are more near you. And we're all here and we're all on your team. We are not here to shame and guilt you. There's been enough of that in the world.
Lauren, thank you. Oh my goodness, so beautiful. I'm so glad that you were here today. And I know that talking about sex in religion are really challenging topics. So I appreciate you being open and diving into this and for all of the work that you do. Thank you.
So welcome. And again, I do not believe that we need to cast our religious beliefs out with our sexual beliefs. I deeply believe that we each have a right to and a responsibility for integrating those two together.
Yeah, so beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of The Naked Connection. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Trust me on this, your sex life and that special someone in your life will thank you for it. And if you really love the show, please take a moment and leave a 5-star review or a written review and let me know what you think. It would mean so much to me and this show. Until next time, happy connecting.